Discretion is advised.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another Fat Nasty Top 10. I don't even know if that's what I'm calling them. Welcome back to another Top 10. And this one is actually a unique one, because I haven't seen one done of it, and two, because I saw a forum on Board Game Geek. I was like, that's actually a pretty good topic. And this is Top 10 Worst Rulebooks. Can be a very detrimental aspect of board gaming is if the game could have the best mechanics, the best theme, the best gameplay, the best everything, but if it has the worst rulebook, it almost kills the game for some people, because if they don't know how to play, then they can't play the best game in the world. And obviously this is one open for discussion. Every top 10 I do is one my opinion. And sometimes rulebooks can be easy for some and difficult for others. And I try to find that middle ground. I try to find games where I either found the rulebook to be difficult for myself or difficult to teach to other players based on how I took the rules in. Also, I looked through that forum and found ones that was said more often, and then I was like, okay, yeah, I can see why that would be difficult. So this ranks from, and this by any means doesn't make these bad games. In fact, there's only one on here that I would say I wouldn't even say it's a bad game. I would just say it's not for me. But the rest, I actually own I've traded away, I've traded away 3 of these games. The rest of them I still own, and I still play, and I still very much like, but the rulebooks are either very wonky, difficult to comprehend, or just terrible in general. So, without further ado, let's get to the number 10. And the number 10 is Through the Ages. Now, I hope there should be a picture there. Through the Ages was one of those rulebooks that wasn't by any means awful. That's why it's at number 10. There was just a lot, and that was another thing I decided on. If there was a lot in just a main rulebook, that can make it difficult, because it's like, oh, okay. I also thought of games that I had to keep referencing back to the rules because I couldn't retain the information, and I feel like I'm pretty good at that. But Through the Ages was one of those games where I kept having to refer back to the rulebook. Some of it made sense. Whenever I was playing the game or reading it, I was like, okay, I get this, but there were some parts in there that I was just like, I have no clue what this means. What? And with Through the Ages, it had 2 rulebooks, kind of like what Fantasy Flight does with their Learn to Play and their rules reference. Their rulebook there was the rulebook, but there was also a Learn to Play guide. It was kind of like a tutorial, which I did. I followed that, and it wasn't that bad following the Learn to Play, but obviously it holds out a lot of the extra features. It holds out a lot of the stuff that is in the core game. And so with the run through and playing it, it was just one of those games where I was constantly having to go back, or my friends, they were just like, I don't know what this means. And a good example is the Pissed Off Worker. I can't remember what he's actually called, but the worker that is forced to work, and he's not a discontent worker. That's it. That for some reason just did not make sense to me, or any of my friends, or my girlfriend. We just that one we couldn't. We were like, so it's used, like we can use him, but he goes down, but we can use him, and it was just, that's the best example. But it wasn't the worst rulebook I've ever seen. Out of these 10, it's definitely why it's number 10. So that's Through the Ages. Number 9, this is one of those that made sense to me, but I can see why others would think it's the worst rulebook they ever made, or they've ever dealt with. This was one of the most said on that forum, and that is Arkham Horror. And I bet you I can pinpoint why everyone thinks it's difficult. One, I have to say this, Fantasy Flight has now done, with their recent games, they do a Learn to Play and a rules reference, which I think is fantastic. I think instead of having a 30-page rulebook, you have a 10-page rulebook that says, hey, you can read this and play the game. And if you have any questions, go to the rules. We're like, okay, so how does combat work? You go to combat, and it's broken down. It is brilliant. I have a friend who doesn't like that, and I don't know why. I have a feeling he's like mentally ill, but I think it's great. This was before that. This was pre-awesome rulebooks Fantasy Flight with Arkham Horror. Arkham Horror has like a 30+ page rulebook that it's just all over the place. It's not really some games have a big rulebook, but they're like, okay, so each round has 5 parts, and then we'll kind of debrief you, and then we're going into detail on each of those phases. Arkham Horror did not do that. Like, that rulebook has so much information, so many nitpicky it's an Ameritrash game, so nitpicky, gritty rules that you have to remember. It's like, how do I close gates? What's that number mean? So if I use this, how does it work with that? How do I use my character? What can I do on my turn? It was just all over the place, and it did not get better with the expansions. They have, I want to say like 8. I want to say like 8 expansions. They have a lot for Arkham Horror, and they finally did away with doing expansions for that. They are now doing a lot with Eldritch Horror, which is also a great game. That one is not on this list because it is way more streamlined. Eldritch Horror, if I was to teach a Ameritrash game to someone, I wouldn't say either of them are gateway games, but Eldritch Horror is definitely easier to learn. I still like Arkham Horror more. But with Arkham Horror, with the expansions, it added so much, and for me, it wasn't that difficult. I do reference this game a lot because while it's one of my favorites, I don't play it all the time. And whenever I'm playing with expansions, I actually, while I was setting it up last time Kat and I played, I had her. I was like, okay, I need you to look up these. I need you to look up these because I don't remember what they do. It's a stack of cards, and a lot of the expansions bring in situational stuff. Like if you happen to draw this adventure card, and you have this option, then you can get this particular card, like a gang card, the Sheldon gang cards. It's like, well, you don't get those, but you can. So I was like, I don't remember how to do this. Whenever you add the more boards, the expansion boards, oh man, like that's a whole separate rulebook in and of itself. So I'm including the expansions in that. But even then, I still felt I grasped it quite well. It's just those little rules where it's like, crap, so how does this work? So that's Arkham Horror at number 9. Number 8 is Battlestar Galactica. Now, you may be thinking, wow, he's just picking big games. Well, actually, that could have been the crux. I guess it's a spoiler. It's not really. Twilight Imperium is actually not on this list. I thought about it, but it was one of those games that I grasped pretty well, and I felt my friends did too when we played it. And I think it's more streamlined. But Battlestar Galactica, to put it in perspective, Battlestar Galactica, a person, I don't know who, it may be on here, has done a combination like rulebook, and I love this game, with all the expansions, because the expansions definitely can bog down. So someone went through and made, now of course I laminated and done this, but they made a rulebook that includes and categorizes and color codes everything that gets added from the game. So Battlestar Galactica is one of those things that if you thought Arkham Horror was bogged down with a lot of stuff, Battlestar Galactica definitely does that. And it doesn't go into as much detail because you look at the board and you're like, okay, so the spaces tell you what to do, but they don't go into any detail. And so the rulebook is kind of all over the place as well, especially with the expansions. The expansions can be pretty bad. They're not bad expansions, but the having to have all those rulebooks, just like Arkham Horror, all over the place. It's like, okay, so how do we even set this up? How do we do any of this with all these expansions? So that's why I felt Battlestar Galactica was worse than Arkham Horror, obviously, because it's at number 8, which now brings me to number 7. Now, number 7 is not a heavy game. It's one of those rulebooks that I think was kind of poorly done. Number 7 is Darkest Night, which I don't play a lot, but I've played it quite a bit. I haven't played it a lot lately. Darkest Night is one of those rulebooks that has a lot of symbols that No, well, not a lot of them. Not like Seven Wonders, where it's just a lot of iconography. But with Darkest Night, they would go through the rules, and I looked this up while I was making this list, and they would use almost like shorthand. They would use symbols instead of writing out the words. Like secrecy is like a little circle with an S in it. And if you don't know what that, and it has those in it before it tells you what that symbol means. And I understand what they were doing, but I kind of feel like I wouldn't say that's necessarily lazy, but it could be, because it's like, oh, I don't know what these symbols mean, or is like they would use dice or a die symbol, and it would just be on a 6, and some people could read that and be like, wait, does that mean if I roll a 6, or are you just putting a die symbol there just to represent a die, not like a particular outcome of that die? And so with Darkest Night, it was just one of those games where they used a lot of symbols throughout the rulebook to shorten up the rulebook, because it's not like a big one, like it's actually fairly small, and you're just it's kind of all over the place with those symbols and you're like, I'm not really understanding how to use my guy. Even the gameplay also uses that, where it's like, okay, so if I go here, and can I use this item, or is this where I'm going to get items, and how do they just kind of used symbols to shorten everything instead of using descriptions of what to do. So Darkest Night rulebook was one of those things that I kind of had to read, and it was organized weird. Like I wish I can give examples with this by I guess we could have gone through the rulebooks, but I don't own all the games on this list. But it was organized in a weird way to which it seemed out of order, and when you're reading it, you're like, I'm not really following. So number 7 is Darkest Night. Number 6 is a game. So far, I've owned every game. I traded away through the ages. But number 6 is a game I also traded away, and I like the game. But it's Shadows of Brimstone, the Swamps of Death, not the city. I think it was City of Ancients. That one was impossible to find. Shadows of Brimstone was a Flying Frog Productions game, I believe. Yes, so Flying Frog Productions is already weird with their gameplay because they use real people, and it's their component quality is off. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about rulebooks. Well, Shadows of Brimstone had a campaign. And this one, and it was like some mythological, weird, like, other world that you can go to, but it was also a Western. And with the rule book, it had a campaign book that was really thick. It had maybe 6 regular campaigns and 6 alternate world campaigns scenarios. And with the actual rule book, dear God, like, that one was pretty bad because of the fact that it had I said Darkest Night had no organization. Shadows of Brimstone definitely didn't have it. And whenever you're trying to figure out actions, it's like, okay, so if I'm trying to do combat, do I roll? It was kind of like a D&D kind of style thing where it's like, okay, I roll to see if I hit, and then I have to check. What do I check to do that? This was a game I was referencing back to a lot, because I couldn't remember. I was looking at all my stuff, and one of the worst parts, this kind of ties into the gameplay, but the rules didn't really help either, is throughout the campaign, you would go to town and you can buy stuff and buy upgrades, but the book didn't tell you, like, it would half-ass tell you what these upgrades did, and there were no cards to represent your upgrades. You almost had to write. It was a tabletop RPG, like D&D or Pathfinder, but it wasn't. And the rules were like that as well. So D&D can also be over someone's head, because it's literally a book. The rule book is a book for D&D. And this one was almost like that, but light. It was like tabletop RPG light. And so with the rules, it just did a very shoddy job in explaining. The pictures in it didn't necessarily help. They could have used some more descriptions. And every time we played, I was constantly looking through that rule book trying to figure out even how to play. And this was like times whenever we played like 2 days in a row, and I was like, I don't remember how to do this. And with the upgrades and how your character can upgrade, I think they did a poor job with that. And at least with D&D, you can look at your character and be like, this is who I am. Oh, this is what I get. Okay, and you can write that down. This one, it had things for your character to upgrade, like little skill points you can spend. But there is no way to actually keep track of that unless you want to mark in the rulebook, which that you don't want to do. And Shadows of Brimstone, this is a side thing about it, but the components you had to put together for the miniatures, I just want to say I hate that. That was god-awful. So that was my number 6, Shadows of Brimstone. My number 5, I should also say that Arkham Horror was actually, funny enough, now Arkham Horror and another one on here were the 2 I most saw in the forum that I've played. Others I was like, yeah, I don't know. I feel like one of these on here, I'm definitely going to be the only one that says so, but yeah, if you watch my show, you can probably be like, I bet I know what one of them is. But anyway, number 5 on here is Mage Knight. Now, Mage Knight is one of those games that I put on here at number 5 because it was it was one of those things where it's like a gamer's game, meaning that it has just a lot of like particular attributes and symbols and a lot of things that you can do, but it was also not explained that well. There's a reason why it was like, hey, do this tutorial because we'll teach you along the way what these symbols mean. So, for example, if you're whoever you are, how you played the game, there was just a lot you can do. It was a slight deck builder. One of the deck builders I actually liked, you would pick these, either you can get some followers or you can get these spells or you can get these items, but they all had different symbols on them. So you would constantly be referencing, okay, so what does that flaming fist do? What can that do? Oh, how many followers can I have? Wait, so if I need to find this place, how do I take... There's a lot of those kind of questions where it bogged down the game a lot. And, well, first of all, they had scenarios, but they really didn't. There was a tutorial, and there was other ones that I would have personally liked an actual campaign. But you started over each time by exploring. It's like, how do I set up the tiles, and if I move, how do I use these cards? And it did a pretty poor job explaining how to use the cards. Whenever it came down to combat, combat, it was like, you would look at these symbols, the tokens, the little hexagon were represented the people, and they would have like, upwards of no symbols to like 6, and you're like, so what do all these do? Like, do these all go at the same time? How does this, like, okay, so does he attack me, and then if I attack, but so if this symbol, this game was oh man, if you really have to, this game honestly would have been better as a video game. Like, there are a few that I'm starting to realize that it's like, they're so bogged down with all these, and I'm not saying all games, like, there are some business simulator games, there are other games that it's like, they function and like the gears work, and they keep going, and it's like, okay, so it makes sense that this does this and this can do this and stuff like that. All makes sense, and sometimes I'm like, that's great as a board game. But there's a few, like Through the Ages and Mage Knight, I would argue saying that this should have been a video game. Like, there's just something about it, and I know a lot of people who like Mage Knight, and it wasn't a terrible game, but the rules kind of made it difficult for me to get into. But that was my number 5, Mage Knight. Remember how I said there's a game on this list that I'm probably the only one that absolutely hates the rulebook? I like the game. I'm liking it less and less, but this game, I feel, has the worst rulebook, and it's only because there is only like one rulebook for it, for how many expansions have came out, and that is Time Stories. At number 4, I truly believe Time Stories has one of the worst rulebooks. It's later on. Initially, when you're playing, you're like, okay, I'm kind of getting this. There wasn't really a whole lot to learn. It's a very simple game, and the problem for me is whenever you have any questions whatsoever, even in the first The Asylum scenario, if you had any questions, that rulebook did not help you. In fact, Even in Asylum, it helped you more because the rulebook was made for Asylum. What pisses me off is each expansion they've came out with. They have came out with the Marcy case, they came out with Prophecy of Dragons, and they came out with Under the Mask. And I think they're coming out with another one. They're probably going to keep coming out with more. Each 3 of those expansions did not come with a rulebook. They came with a slight deck of cards that would kind of explain the new mechanic. It's like, okay, that's great. But what if the mechanic makes sense, or even if you have a question about the mechanic, or if you have a question about, okay, so what's going on whenever we do this? It doesn't explain any of that, and that pisses me off so much with time stories. Because if you watch any of my run-throughs, I have run-throughs for all of them, except Asylum, because we did such a bad job. But every one of them, we're sitting there and we're like, what's going on here? So what do we do if this happens? And you don't know. You kind of have to house rule it, or just assume, or look it up, and it's like, we don't know, because it didn't come with a fucking rule book. Like, an FAQ, anything would have been great with that game and these expansions. But no, it's like, oh, kind of figure it out yourself. I don't want to do that. I want to be like, I want to know, I'm one of those guys that wants to know for sure how something is done. And there's a few games that I house rule, but I don't house rule a lot because I'm just like, this is the way the game is. Unless it's truly a groundbreaking like rule or something I really don't like but can easily modify, I usually don't house rule. With time stories, I felt like you did. You had to be like, I guess this is how we do it. I don't want to do that. So that's my number 4, time stories. At my number 3 is another Flying Frog Productions game that I feel did a much worse job with their rulebook, and that is Fortune and Glory. First of all, most of my games that I play, I can kind of pull the game out, set it up, and be like, I remember how to play, but I kind of need a refresher. Fortune and Glory, its rulebook is so bad that I have to read it. I have to read the whole thing again, and then I'm like, okay, I think we can play. And when something happens, I'm like, okay, so how does that happen? And like, what? How is this set up? What happens if this person is here? What do we do if we draw this card? How do we pass this cliffhanger? What happens if we die? They just added so much to the base game, and then the expansions just bogged it down even more, that like I'm constantly looking at the rule book. And there were times when, because Kat likes this game, she actually likes it a lot, and I don't think it's a bad game. But whenever we're playing, I remember last time we played, I was like, I'm sorry, because I had to keep going back to the rulebook. Maybe it's just me. Maybe this is one of those rulebooks that I just can't wrap my head around. But I remember apologizing because I could not remember or retain the information, because I don't think it was a lack of information, it was just a lack of organization, where I'm like, I don't even know where this is. Or okay, so if we're doing this co-op, because the rules change if you want to do co-op. And you can do a semi-co-op, you can do teams. I feel like they should have just picked one, been like, hey, this is a co-op game. You're up against, Nazis, or you're up against cultists, or you're up against whoever the other faction was. Mobsters. Instead of just being like, well, we can do that, or we can be against each other. It's weird, and it's just a very bad rulebook, and also fairly long for what gets added. And because there's so many components that you're just like, okay, so what do all these do? That was my number 3, Fortune and Glory. Number 2, this is the second one that was in that forum that I saw a lot, and I totally agree. I've heard they're doing a second edition. I heard they're redoing it, which makes me super happy, because maybe they'll fix the damn rulebook. And that's Robinson Crusoe. I absolutely love this game. This is one of my top 10s. I love this as a co-op. I love everything about this game, except the rulebook. The rulebook is one of the worst I've ever read. And number 2, it's one of the worst. Obviously, 3, 2, and 1, typically, those are the worst rulebooks I've ever had to deal with. Number 2, and a person on the forum said a pretty good description. It managed to make a mildly easy Euro game, if you can even call it Euro, and make it hard. Because like there's lack of punctuation, lack of organization, lack of information when certain things happen, that you're just kind of running blind when things don't go like they should. And it's like, well, so what happens if this happens, if we draw a card and we don't really understand, oh well, I guess you're gonna have to figure it out yourself. And that's one of the things that they do. I haven't really seen anything, but I really hope that if they do a second edition, that they fix and streamline that rulebook, because one of the things is it just kind of all bleeds together. And because there are some rulebooks that are brilliant, it's like, okay, well, then this game has 5 rounds, and in each round there's 3 phases. Here's phase 1, and this is what happens on phase 1, phase 2, and then phase 3. This one is just like, bleh, this is everything that can happen, and you're like, okay, I don't even know where to look if something happens that I don't know what to do. I played this game, I played this game recently, and I remember we were looking at it, and there's so many different scenarios that the game doesn't explain quite as well what it does. And I feel like if they had multiple scenarios, that they could have at least had a few FAQ questions for each one, or a different way to explain each scenario instead of having them different cards. Like maybe actually have like a full page in the rulebook, like Mansions of Madness or something, where it's like, oh, these are the different scenarios and this is what it does. Mansions of Madness almost made this list, but I decided not to put it on here because it has a second edition that makes it way better. But that is Robinson Caruso at number 2. Now, for my number 1, I am kind of cheating because this game is not out yet. I don't even know if it successfully made it to Kickstarter because I couldn't find that. I tried looking for it, but I've done a run through of this. It was on Kickstarter whenever I did it. It was in the discussion. It was pretty much the biggest thing I harped on about it. And it was one of the driving factors of why I was doing this rulebook. So my number 1 is The Glorious Fall. Oh my god. This rulebook is the worst. If you can even call it a rulebook. This game, I just said that there are some games that I was like, okay, I don't really know how this works, or if I don't understand, there's nowhere in the rules to go tell me. That sucks, but I've still been able to play the game. I set this game up, looked at it, read the rulebook, and then went, at that time we lived in a townhouse, went downstairs, and there was my girlfriend and 2 of my friends who were like, are ready, and I'm like, I was holding the rulebook and I'm like, I don't know how to play. This was the first game that ever made me feel incredibly stupid because I read the rulebook and had so many questions, and it was on Kickstarter, so I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, but it had so many questions that I was like, I have no idea how to play this game. And there were times whenever I was like, okay, well, let's go upstairs and we'll run through it together. We'll learn together, everyone. And they had 5 eras, I think. We got through 1. It took us like an hour and a half to 2 hours to get through 1 era. Now, this is a fairly long game. The run-through's 4 hours, 3-4 hours. And even then, as we were going through it, I was emailing the guy. Like, I sent him like 3 or 4 emails with multiple questions. And I was like, I have no idea how to play your game. These are all the questions that we all had. Luckily, he made a short, like 30-minute video of one of the first eras of how to play, which did help. Like, it helped a lot. But I watched that thing twice, read the rules again, and was finally able to figure out how to play. But that is one of the worst rulebooks I have ever had the unfortunate time to actually read. And I really hope, if they made their Kickstarter goal, I hope that they fix it. He even said he tried to be succinct, which is fine. Like, you don't want a rulebook that also that is too long, that you're reading the same thing over and over, they're rehashing the same mechanics over and over. But you don't want to be too succinct where no one... He even told me, he's like, well, I knew what I was talking about, so I guess he's like, well, when he reads it, of course, you're the one who made the game. Like, you know how to play. So it's like, well, I know how to play, so whenever I typed it, I figured it was making sense in my head. I'm like, okay, I've made rulebooks for myself. I've tried making a board game, and I have a few ideas. And when I was typing them out, and my friend was with me, he's like, "Man, you're really making like this rulebook seem like stupid. You're making it seem like it's pandering to the dumbest person." And you almost have to do that. Now, I'm not saying dumb people play games. I'm just saying that you want it to be almost as crystal clear as possible and to have no questions. You can't sit there and type or write and be like, okay, well, I know what happens whenever, you know, the empire moves or whatever. So I don't really have to go into detail. You do, because I didn't make the damn game. So that was a glorious fall. I wish I maybe some of you guys have played this game or look into it. That doesn't mean it's a bad game. This is one of those that it was not for us. But I can definitely see others who would like it a lot. And I'm looking over, and I actually hung up the map, because the map and the board, it's a cloth map. It is awesome. But the rules at this point in time, the Kickstarter rules, the only rules that I have knowledge of and dealt with, was literally the worst rulebook I have ever held in my hands. And that's it, everyone. That was the top 10 worst rulebooks that I have had the misfortune to read. Let me know if you agree or disagree. Let me know what rulebooks you thought were pretty bad or terrible in the comments below. Also, let me know if you want to see any particular top 10s you'd like. And other than that, like, comment, share, and subscribe, and have a wonderful whatever time of day it is for you. Hey everyone, thank you for watching, and I hope that you enjoyed the video. If you want to help out the channel, I have my Patreon link right there. If you want to make some suggestions on board games you'd like to see us run through, I have my board game geek list right there. And if you want to just, like the Facebook page, I have my Facebook link right there. And have a wonderful whatever time of day it is for you.